It's official. Japan is in stagflation, somewhere it has not been since the 1970s. And America's not far behind. Really, our best hope is change the definition of stagflation like we did with recession. The nation of Japan is currently frozen in the headlights, stuck between a weak economy on life support from cheap money, super low interest rates, and a crashing yen as a result of those super low rates. The yen threatens the Japanese financial system, and it threatens savage price hikes for Japanese families who overwhelmingly depend on imported food and energy. In short, Bank of Japan needs to hike interest rates to save the yen and head off inflation, but they can't hike because of economic weakness. In fact, Japan just entered recession a few weeks ago. Now, the Bank of Japan had been trying to carefully maneuver between the two, so a little stimulus here, a little jawboning there, so the public does not notice what's happening. Well, last week, Japan's unions scrambled the chessboard, meaning inflation is coming and it could be here to stay. So Japanese unions typically coordinate pay negotiations every year. It's called the Spring Offensive, and an intentionally military metaphor. Japanese unions used to be surprisingly violent. This year's offensive was a hand grenade. After literally 30 years of stagnant wages, this year Japan's large companies granted 4% annual pay hikes. Small and medium companies, which represent millions of workers, went all the way to 6%. And some large companies, it went much further. So Toyota, which is a bellwether for corporate Japan, granted every last yen the union asked for. Honda and All Nippon Airlines both granted almost 6%. Mitsubishi Heavy gave 8%. Nippon Steel, which is in the news for buying U.S. steel, forked over 12%, the biggest jump since 1979. Retailer Aeon granted 7% to its 400,000 part-time employees, signaling the wage hikes are trickling down to just about everybody, which is the Bank of Japan's worst nightmare. Now, all central bankers know that once inflation gets baked into union negotiations, it can be very, very hard to uproot. So, in short, Japan is already in recession. It's got 50% price hikes coming like a golf ball in a snake thanks to the weak yen, and now corporate Japan just baked it in. So what's next? Brought to you by Unchained.com. The government of Japan is good at many things: crime, immigration, fixing potholes. What it's not good at is managing the economy. In fact, they've turned in 30 years of stagnation, bought with an eye-watering mountain of debt. So in U.S. terms, Japan's government debt is roughly $60 trillion. This raises the odds that a stagflationary Japan could be the spark that sets off a global financial crisis we haven't seen since 2008. More concerning, the dominoes are now falling towards a coordinated global stagflation in Europe, America, and even China, and now Japan. Last time this happened was in the 1970s, and it only ended when Paul Volcker's Fed hiked rates high enough to engineer a pair of savage recessions, at the time the worst since the Depression. So we could be looking at a 2008 crisis and a 1970s stagflation altogether, which is something we have not seen since 1929. So what could stop it? Easy. Slash government spending. That reins in inflation. It grows the economy by returning resources, workers, steel, capital, to the private sector. Of course, the opposite is happening. Biden just asked for another 20%. Eurozone governments now spend precisely 49.6% of their entire economy. And Japan is mulling a fresh spending package to fight inflation with handouts, so creating inflation to fight inflation. At this pace, we are headed straight for the 70s, just as fast as our governments can spend us there. A new episode of the Weekly Roundup podcast just went up. Check it out at profsaintange.com. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.